There is something quietly revealing about the car you defend in an argument. Not the car you own, necessarily the car you defend. The one where, the moment someone says something dismissive about it, you feel a small but very real flicker of personal offense. Like they said something about you. Because in a way, they did. Car people have always used machines to say things about themselves that they would never say out loud. And nowhere is that more true, more tribal, more occasionally unhinged than in the world of hot hatchbacks. Six cars. Six very different tribes. And every single one of them absolutely convinced the other five made the wrong choice. What's interesting is that the argument is never really about the cars. It never was. It's about the person sitting behind the wheel and what they needed that car to say about them the moment they signed the paperwork, and what they still need it to say every single time someone questions their decision, which, in hot hatch circles, happens more often than you might expect. Let's start with the car that invented the argument in the first place. The Volkswagen Golf GTI has been in this conversation since the 1970s, and at this point it practically owns the category. Every hot hatch that came after it has been measured against it at some point, whether those cars admit it or not. That legacy is simultaneously its greatest strength and the sharpest weapon its critics have ever found. Because the GTI of today is excellent, refined, composed, turbocharged, with around 241 horsepower depending on market and trim. It rides well. It handles predictably. It never embarrasses you. But here is the thing about cars that never embarrass you, they also rarely surprise you anymore. The people who love the GTI love it the way you love a restaurant you have been going to for 20 years. Consistent, trustworthy, exactly what you ordered, exactly how you remembered it. The people who have grown tired of it will tell you it got too comfortable somewhere along the way, too polished. Too much of a premium product that gradually forgot what made the original so raw and so urgent and so genuinely exciting to drive out of a dealership for the first time. They will tell you the soul quietly left around the seventh generation and never fully came back. They are not entirely wrong. GTI people know this. They just don't particularly care, which is itself a very GTI personality trait, quietly confident, completely unbothered, and mildly irritating to everyone else at the table who was hoping for more of a reaction. Now, the Honda Civic Type R. This is where opinions stop being casual and start being load-bearing parts of someone's personality. The Type R is, by most objective measures, one of the greatest front-wheel drive performance cars ever built. The current generation lapped the Nürburgring faster than cars with significantly more power and significantly more pretension. 315 horsepower. A six-speed manual only, no automatic option, no comfort-first trim, no compromise anywhere in the lineup. And a design that looks like it was styled by someone who grew up playing racing games at maximum graphics settings and saw absolutely nothing wrong with that approach and would make the same decision again without hesitation. That last point is where the room divides cleanly and permanently in two. Type R owners see an aerodynamic sculpture built entirely with purpose, every vent, every splitter, every aggressive angle of that rear wing doing something measurable and intentional at speed. Everyone else sees a park bench bolted to a family hatchback by someone with unresolved adolescent energy and no one around them willing to intervene. Both observations are technically accurate, which is precisely what makes this argument so durable and so enjoyable for everyone involved. What's genuinely interesting is how much the styling controversy actually serves the car in the long run. It filters its own buyers before they even visit a dealership. The person who chooses a Type R has already decided, consciously or not, that they don't need the car park to validate their decision. That is, paradoxically, a deeply confident personality hiding inside a very loud shell. They know exactly what they bought. They just don't need you to know that they know. The Mini Cooper JCW is the only car on this list that starts an argument before it even moves. Half of your audience just reacted to seeing it included here alongside genuine performance machinery, and the other half nodded because they saw this coming and have been having this exact argument for years. The JCW produces 231 horsepower from a turbocharged 2-liter engine, reaches 60 miles per hour in under 6 seconds, and handles, with a sharpness and precision that genuinely surprises people who wrote it off as a lifestyle purchase before they ever sat in one and actually tried to find its limits. The problem or the feature, depending entirely on your perspective and your patience for brand aesthetics, is everything that surrounds the driving experience. The Mini brand has spent decades building a visual and cultural language that some people find deeply charming and others find quietly exhausting after about 15 minutes of exposure. There is a version of Mini ownership that is entirely about color options and roof stripes and personalization catalogs and being seen outside a coffee shop on a Saturday morning. And then there is the JCW, which is something meaningfully different, a car that happens to live inside that same aesthetic world but approaches the actual driving with complete and total seriousness. The person who loves the JCW has made full peace with the fact that strangers will assume they bought it for the former reasons rather than the latter. They find this mildly amusing, sometimes very amusing. The person who dismisses it will tell you you're paying a significant premium for heritage and image over raw engineering substance. They are partially right, and they know it, and so do JCW owners if they're being honest. The difference is that JCW owners got in, drove it hard through a proper set of corners, and stopped needing the argument to go their way somewhere around the second or third time they did it. They just genuinely enjoy the car, which is, arguably, the entire point of buying one, a concept that gets lost in these conversations far more often than it should. You will spend 45 minutes researching the correct engine oil for a car you drive twice a week. You will read every forum thread that has ever existed about a car you do not own yet. The pinned comment below this video asks considerably less of you than that. Worth a look. Then there is the Mercedes-AMG A45S, 415 horsepower, from a hatchback. That is not a typo, and it is not a misprint, and it is not being rounded up for dramatic effect by someone who got carried away. The A45S holds the verified title of the most powerful series production hatchback ever built, and it carries that fact with the kind of straight-faced composure that only a Mercedes can manage without it feeling like showing off. The 2-liter turbocharged engine produces figures that would have seemed fictional attached to this body style a decade ago, and it delivers them with a clinical, almost cold efficiency that is very much on brand for AMG and very polarizing in equal measure among people who think deeply about what a car should feel like to drive. People who love this car love it with the specific satisfaction of someone who found an entirely rational justification for an entirely irrational decision and has now rehearsed that justification enough times that it flows naturally and confidently in conversation. 415 horsepower, most powerful production hatchback ever manufactured. The math works out. The people who question the whole premise, and there are genuinely many of them with genuinely reasonable points, will tell you that at this price point, you are standing at the entrance to the territory of genuinely exotic machinery. That spending this kind of money on something that reads, from across a car park, as a very well-dressed family runabout requires a very particular and somewhat complicated relationship with the concept of visible reward for significant expenditure. That personality absolutely exists in the real world and is more common than critics assume. It is simply unbothered by your pricing objections and your alternative suggestions, which is perhaps the most AMG thing about the entire situation from start to finish. If the GTI is the espresso, the Volkswagen Golf R is the double shot that nobody at the table ordered, but everyone quietly wanted, and nobody will openly admit to wanting until someone else orders it first. 315 horsepower, all-wheel drive as standard, 0 to 60 in under 5 seconds, and styling so deliberately understated it begins to feel less like a design choice and more like a philosophical position on the nature of confidence. The Golf R community is perhaps the most internally conflicted tribe on this entire list, and that specific tension is what makes them genuinely fascinating to observe from the outside. They chose the most capable, most expensive, most technically accomplished version of a car, with a 50-year legacy behind it, and received in return something so seamlessly competent, so thoroughly resolved in every area, that it occasionally forgets to remind the driver that it is doing something quite remarkable. Critics call it sterile, soulless. the automotive equivalent of a very well formatted spreadsheet that never once made anyone feel anything beyond mild satisfaction and quiet appreciation. Golf R owners find this assessment genuinely baffling because the car is objectively brilliant and they are fully and completely aware of that. And yet, in a quiet moment, on a long, empty stretch of motorway with nothing demanding a response, they understand with uncomfortable clarity exactly what the critics mean. That specific and unspoken tension between knowing with absolute certainty that you made the correct choice and occasionally, privately, in a moment you would never discuss publicly, wishing it felt just slightly more incorrect, is a Golf R owner experience that is far more widely shared than the community will ever formally acknowledge. And then there is the Toyota GR Corolla, the newest member of this conversation and already one of the most passionate voices in it. 300 horsepower from a turbocharged three-cylinder engine that sounds considerably angrier and more purposeful than its displacement has any right to suggest on paper. All-wheel drive with a torque distribution system you can physically adjust yourself depending on what the road ahead is asking of you. Not something you typically encounter at this price point from a manufacturer whose entire global reputation was built on making the sensible choice feel like the obvious one. The GR Corolla arrived as though someone deep inside Toyota had been quietly, professionally furious for a long time about what the brand had gradually allowed itself to become in the minds of driving enthusiasts, and had finally received the budget approval and the internal political cover to do something decisive and irreversible about it. The result is a car with waiting lists, a car with a Morizo edition that enthusiasts discuss with a reverence normally reserved for machinery costing 3 times as much, and a car whose exhaust note owners will describe to you in considerable detail in a conversation that never asked for that information and did not leave an obvious opening for it. The critics, and they do exist even here, will point to an interior that prioritizes functional honesty over premium tactile feel and a fuel consumption figure that is entirely beside the point but gets raised anyway because people need somewhere reasonable to push back when everything else is so difficult to argue with. The GR Corolla buyer is unusually self-aware as a group. They know exactly what they purchased, exactly what they traded away to get it, and exactly why that particular trade made complete and total sense to them personally at the time and still does. Very few people end up in a GR Corolla by accident or by default. That clarity of intention, that absence of compromise in the buying decision itself, is the car's defining psychological fingerprint. Here is what connects all 6 of these cars, and it has nothing to do with lap times or horsepower figures or how many heads turned when you left a car park on a Tuesday afternoon. Every single one of them asks you to make a deliberate and revealing choice about who you are and what you need that choice to communicate to the world and to yourself. The GTI buyer chooses legacy and trusts it without apology. The Type R buyer chooses capability and stopped explaining the wing to people who were never going to understand it anyway. The JCW buyer chooses the experience itself and has made genuine peace with being consistently misread by people who never bothered to drive one. The AMG buyer chose 415 horsepower and considered that a complete and sufficient sentence requiring no further elaboration. The Golf R buyer chose correctness and lives thoughtfully and sometimes quietly with the particular complexity of that decision. The GR Corolla buyer chose intention above everything else and has never once seriously second-guessed it since. None of them made the wrong choice, but none of them chose by accident either. The car you defend in an argument is never really about the car. It is about the version of yourself you decided to back when you had the opportunity to make that call. And the fact that you will still defend it to a complete stranger on the internet, sometimes for considerably longer than is strictly necessary and occasionally past the point where it is still enjoyable for anyone involved, says everything about how much that original decision actually meant to you.